Good morning. Just going to let everything get connected up real quick and then I'm going to get started. We got kind of a brief presentation this morning. It's not going to take too long. Just one moment and we'll get the ball rolling. So, what I'm going to talk about this morning is a little bit more about cybersecurity. I know this has been a subject that I talked about last, and I have a lot of other things to talk about, but this is a real important subject, and I think that it really deserves a little bit of attention and time. So, the particular thing that I'm going to talk about this morning is pretty much a kind of simplified, down to earth view of what I think the threat is, and just kind of talk a little bit about the you know how a business can address the cybersecurity threat. So I deal with these impacts all the time. Like, I see this stuff happen pretty regularly. We'll see basically like some graph that we're watching will kind of spike. And we'll look at that graph and we'll say, why did that graph spike? And it may be because there was a lot of logs that the server starts to get hit with, like error logs from something or whatever. Or it might be performance on the graph takes a big spike. And we usually have to go back and look at that and kind of figure out like where did this attacker come from? How did they what vector did they use to kind of cause this disruption or gain access to this service or something like that? And so we kind of can trace that back and kind of figure out, like, where are they coming from? What are they doing? But they've gotten a lot more sophisticated. So it used to be like you would see fairly straightforward attacks coming from like one single place, right? And it would just be like, here's an attack, boom. And you go and you look at it and you go, okay, fine, just block that from hitting me and I'm good. All right. Well, the attackers have kind of like started to come from all kinds of different angles and they hop around. And so sometimes they'll aim a stream of data at you, and how do you escape that? Or sometimes they'll make a connection to you, and if you don't know, I remember a few years ago, I really wasn't as experienced as I am today at dealing with this, right? And so like I had this server sitting out there, and it was this web server that I'd built for myself, really, and I hadn't really kept it up to date with patches. I did all the stuff that I talk about that's wrong to do, okay? I just kind of threw it out there, I let it run, I didn't really do anything with it, and it totally got hacked, all right? I mean, I might as well have just put a big beacon on it that said, come hack me, okay? And it did. And I was really surprised at, like, the effect and what was going on it. And at first, it was just like the performance, just like the CPU spiked, right? Like, what is going on here? And the performance of this thing just cratered. All like this website that it was serving just was. I mean, it could not keep up with the load on the server. So of course, I want to keep this thing running. What am I going to do? Well, I just dialed up the size of the server, right? Just grew the thing. 'Cause in the cloud, you can do that. You can just pull your server and make it huge, right? And essentially, like, I'm like, great. Now my server can still run its services, but it's still doing this thing, and it's spiking my CPU really hard. So it took me a while to figure out how that was occurring and what was really going on. And eventually, I figured out where to look and what was being affected and what to do. But in the meantime, I had this huge stress around like what is going on here. So the attackers are they're getting more sophisticated. Dealing with them is getting more challenging, and these guys they have a variety of programming methodologies and a variety of languages that they know. There's a lot of programming and computer science being taught around the world right now, and there's a lot of it that's being. I mean, it's considered a good thing to learn. Okay, so it's considered a great thing to teach, a great thing to learn, a great skill to have, and so there's just a lot of people though that have learned this around the world, and a lot of them are applying it to evil. So the morality of the globe is not equal in every part. Okay, so at the same time, we've also seen like these things coming out that are causing us a lot of problems, where these tools get dumped and these zero-day attacks happen, and these the fact that one of the really bad ones is that NSA hack and the shadow brokers and all this stuff. That's really bad stuff. That's like what people have talked about for years. What if this happened? Wouldn't that be terrible? Okay, and it happened. Like, really? I mean, this is what we've been talking about, and it happened. And I mean, it hasn't been like the big subject on the news, because the news has there are other things that they're talking about right now, like that aren't actual real news in the realm of technology. I barely hear it in the like mainstream news feeds. I mean, I hear certain subjects and that's it. So occasionally now, we've heard a lot about hacking in the last couple of years. I'll tell you what. During the election cycle a year ago, or so, whatever, it was like you heard this all the time: computer hack, email server this, hack this, dumps of emails there. I mean, you heard that stuff, and we just recently heard the WannaCry stuff that popped out. That was absolutely terrible. I mean, I'm glad that got some pretty solid coverage. I saw it in the feeds a day plus before I started to hear about it really in the mainstream news, though. So, we are seeing the threats all the time. They're evolving constantly, and I really think that they're going to continue to do so. Now, the thing about dealing with this stuff, guys, is how to not become the low-hanging fruit, right? Like that server I talked about that I set up, it was like low-hanging fruit. I mean, it just had old versions of stuff. It got scanned, popped, hacked, taken over, practically obliterated, okay? So there are hacker search engines that scan the whole entire internet and all the time, and they you may think, well, how can it scan the whole internet? That sounds crazy, okay? You know what? It really, I can scan the whole internet in 30 days. If I take a server and if I load it with the whole entire block of all IP addresses on the entire planet, okay, V4 at least, and if I plug that database into my server, and if I point it at the internet and say scan, all right, about 30 days or so later of pressing my CPUs to the top and pushing my internet connection pretty hard, I'm going to get all the data back that I needed to basically have a database of stuff from that scan. And that's what, there's one particular website called Shodan. Shodan does this stuff. So if we search Shodan for something, we can find actually vulnerable stuff that's out there, that's just publicly out there. So the hackers don't even have to even build their own tools to look for it anymore. Now there's a search engine for it. It used to be that it was a little bit harder. You had to actually know something to find something that was vulnerable. But now you don't even have to do that. You just have to be find me something that I can attack, and there it is. Okay, it's really ridiculous. All right. Then, on top of that, we've got these crazy powerful tools now, like Metasploit is awesome. It's great. But at the same time, the bad guys just use it and they just go, okay, bump, 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 breach. And poof, there they are. All right? In some cases. So, when it's that easy, the system is going to get hacked in very quickly, of course. And, but I mean, it's not uncommon for for a poorly configured system to get attacked by multiple hackers, and for there to be multiple hackers that have hacked one single system, and those hackers might even encounter each other and see each other's stuff, and sometimes they'll clean up after each other or knock the other guy off or something like that because they want that system. And I mean, they literally have it. They don't care, right? Because they've got it, and these tools make it so easy. So for that to work, there has to be kind of like this set of circumstances that all the conditions have to be met and the conditions have to be right. But you know what? Those circumstances happen. And I mean, the circumstances to create Earth were right. The circumstances to make weather patterns are right. There's circumstances always come down to the ones that make certain effects occur are out there, and they're going to continue to be out there. So you can't really say, oh, maybe I won't be captured by that circumstance because it doesn't apply to me now. You don't know what's changing, okay? So what applies today doesn't necessarily apply tomorrow, because researchers learn new stuff. They research new stuff. They find stuff in the code that is essentially this game of Tetris that the code is playing in the memory, and the blocks are falling down a certain way, and they all have to line up, and they all have to lock and fit together a certain way. When they don't, and there's a hole, and the attacker can use that hole to plug something else in and run it and execute it, then essentially that game of Tetris and that hole doesn't get disclosed immediately for everything, for everyone all the time, right? It just like one day some researchers like, oh look, there's this thing, there's this problem. Hey guys, y'all might want to do something about that, okay? So one day everything is fine and the next day it's not. And that's why we have to be just very vigilant, very diligent on dealing with updating our systems and things like that, not waiting to the last minute to run our Windows 7 upgrades or something, or not like holding back on updating some old Linux system because it's going to break everything when we do it, and it's going to it's going to cause all this problem. We have to stay on top of these things and have a plan for that, and that's part of the cost of running technology, guys. So I just want to reiterate, technology has a cost. To run it, you have to spend the money it takes to defend it properly. So if you're running Windows 7, you're not even following a basic concept for running essentially the most current version of something so that you can follow the best security practices, all right? So if you really want to follow the best security practices, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you're not running something that is not the latest version of software, period. Okay, so, the challenge here is that that's not always possible, all right? I say, yeah, let's all do this. Well, let's look at the reality of the situation. Okay, the reality is, and this is reality because the real world works is the real world instead of the best case that we want. All right, the reality is many of our applications won't run on the latest stuff. And why is this? It's because the software vendors have to write updates for their own code after the software comes out. That's the latest stuff. So when the latest stuff comes out, then the companies that are writing the software oftentimes are taking the time to go ahead and try to get their software up to that, but it may take some time for it to work properly. This is especially true in older types of setups and legacy configurations with client-server software applications that have fat clients on computers, like large accounting applications and specialized software packages. It's also true with web-based stuff too. Especially these applications that use like this old legacy stuff that requires Internet Explorer, and it has to have a certain version of Internet Explorer or it won't work. And it's ridiculous. We end up with this all the time. Some application, especially some cloud application, is not up to date and requires users to run an older version of Internet Explorer. It's ridiculous because then what happens is those users have this old version. They use it, okay? and they access their applications, but they also run other stuff on it too. They browse over to like, some Sudoku game, all right? They'll go to like some Flash-based game site, some like website where people can play some games on their browser. They don't have, and they're taking a break. It's like, solitaire used to be. Now you go online and you find chess or checkers or whatever, right? And it's cool. And maybe you can even play it socially, or maybe just, whatever, right? These sites, a lot of them are just little free sites that are driven by these little advertisements, Google and banner ads and stuff. And problem is that many of these are poorly configured servers too, and poorly configured sites, and they're not really kept up to date, and they're kind of just thrown up there, and the cost of the technology isn't really paid that much attention to, especially if it's a free site running free games, especially if they're Flash. Apple quit pretty much supporting Flash. Apple is like, we can't do this. Flash is so terrible for us to run from a security standpoint, we cannot continue to do it. So a lot of these really great graphical experiences people have been accessing online have changed. The technology underlying what's driving those has changed, and that technology is no longer based on Flash in many cases. But there's a lot of sites online where it still is, and Flash is extremely insecure. It's an old legacy tech. It's got major security problems with the way that it works, okay? From so many points of views. I know Steve Jobs hated it. He really hated it forever. Now, it's also one of the major technologies that grew the web, and it's on the web, and it's still found all over the place. So it's a very important technology, but a lot of people are, they'll play a little game, little Flash games and stuff like that. Those sites oftentimes get hacked, and they're full of parasites and viruses. Well, when your computer web browser is running some Internet Explorer version, 7 or something like that, let's just say, right? Then you turn around and you visit a site. It's got some kind of worm on it, and what do? Well, you end up with this thing inside of the memory of your browser. So your browser's running now, and so you have like this virus inside of your web browser, okay? And there it is. It's inside. So now it might be able to make your web browser do some things, right? But it in effect, that is a foothold, and it's a place where essentially an attacker can start to do other things. They might be able to download your browser cache. Boom. Well, maybe inside of your browser cache there might be cached passwords for other websites that you visit, okay? And an old browser cache might be very vulnerable to being decrypted, let's say. They might be able to download your history, your cookies. If you had just logged into your bank account and there was still a cookie active there, they might even be able to pull that and try to inject. Now, bank account's probably a little extreme, but on certain less secure sites, like other kinds of sites that are less secure you might be visiting and logging into, they might be able to even take a cookie out of your browser and then use it to log into that site from their own browser by injecting the cookie into the session and throwing it across back at the server and making that server make a connection. And if that site doesn't have SSL, which so many sites don't have that HTTPS, okay, and they don't have that little green, SSL check, so many sites are transmitting things insecurely. They don't really have a way of knowing to prove who's making what connections. So there's a great deal of threat out there online. When we use the internet, we do expose ourselves to risk out there. And I mean, if we're just visiting sites like CNN, maybe that's okay because they're making the investment in the technology to run it. If we're just visiting Facebook, which is a good large portion of the web, then that's good because they're a fairly secure walled garden, except for all of the people hacking your Facebook account, trying to friend you, that are fake accounts, making fake accounts in your name, trying to get you to do all kinds of things to give them access to your Facebook account. I mean, all kinds of stuff, right? So there's a number of threats wherever we go. We don't even know where they all are. I like the quote from Donald Rumsfeld. I heard this some years ago. Donald Rumsfeld said, there are known knowns, there are known unknowns, and there are unknown unknowns. And that means that there are things that we know, There are things that we know we don't know. And there are things we don't know we don't know. That is very applicable to the security realm because there is a lot of all of those situations. You know, we know this version of software is insecure. Okay? And we know that we don't know that if there are other insecurities on on that software as well, and we also don't even know what kind of threats are out there for us to possibly even encounter and face. Like, there's a lot of things we don't know because we don't until we encounter them, until somebody figures it out, until somebody thinks about it, thinks it up, and puts it into play and practice and applies it. Then many times, there's still a lot of unanswered questions about things in technology. I'm not going to get into the deep dive as far as like how this stuff works and how it happens, but I am going to just talk. I've talked here about of what we see and the fact that we have to that IT people have to defend this stuff, but it's also just as important for the business owners to take the action and to step up to the plate and apply the budgets. I know one thing that I see all the time is pushbacks in budget. I don't want to spend the money. It costs too much money. Is the threat real? Is the threat going to affect me? Am I going to be impacted by it? If I am, what's the impact going to be? How much is that going to cost? Is it really worth trying to go about trying to actually protect myself or my organization from this? Even no matter what kind of chance there is of the threat, there are always a large percentage of, not large percentage necessarily, but there's a good percent of people that either just physically don't have the resources, or they just don't. They have so many other things that they have to apply those resources to that a nebulous threat that they really don't even know. Like, they may think, well, do I have backups? Can I weather a hit? What would the impact of a hit be to me, and how can I kind of like minimize that without actually really going too far? And so there's a very fine line and a balance here. Like, if you're in an organization and you're running like a lot of Windows 7 computers, for example, and old servers and stuff like that, you might think to yourself twice before you go upgrade all those. Maybe you just recently bought a bunch of computers or something. You may have just finished buying a lot of computers, and suddenly now you turn around and you have to buy more, and you just finished buying more before that, and more before that, and it's like, when does it end? It doesn't seem to ever end, and it's just like computers just seem to be just this thing you're constantly buying, over and over and over again, and software and upgrades and system updates, and it just drives people bonkers because the cost is crazy, and it really makes you more competitive to have the best stuff and to run the best stuff. But if we spend all of our energy and time focusing on trying to defend ourselves and fortify ourselves, and we don't spend any time on actually like how do we use technology to improve our processes and make our business more efficient and do better and improve the organization, like if we don't actually use our technology to become more competitive, then just because it can make us more competitive does not mean anything. So we have to really balance all of this. It's so hard. It's very hard. It actually is not something that makes a lot of sense to, from a standpoint of if you think about like, what should we do? How far should we go? It's not intuitive, okay? It really is not intuitive. There is fear that drives a lot of decisions. There's practicality that drives a lot of decisions. There's a lot of different philosophical mentalities that drive choices that people make, and the choices that they make are going to affect their business and are going to have an impact on their chances for success, for sure. Unfortunately, it's tough to know what the right decision is to make. Do you go ahead and do you do all the upgrades? Do you go ahead and do you spend the money? And then when are you going to have to spend the money again? And when's the next version coming out? And when's it going to end? Okay? So The world we live in is just, it is what it is, unfortunately. I would encourage people to not be low hanging fruit. That is very important. It's very, very critical. If you are the low hanging fruit, then you're sure to experience uh, probably the highest chance of having some issues, but you might not have any at all. And if you secure yourself to, if you put yourself in the best security scenario you can, you still might get breached. Look at the NSA. Look at all of our federal spy organizations and all of these guys. They've all been breached and hacked. Every one of them. And every one of them has all the resources that they should technically need to do anything they need to protect themselves, and they should have all the experts, and they should have all the capabilities, and yet they still get breached. So I ask, if the best people that have the best foot forward, that are in the best position, that have the smartest brains and the most money, still get their butts kicked by this stuff, how can we expect us little small time IT people that are, understaffed, underfunded, underpowered, overworked, underpaid, all this stuff applies to practically, just about any IT support company that's working with small businesses today. All of that generally applies because the small businesses they're not trying to spend as much money on their technology as they can. In many cases, there's a lot of other challenges. I run a business. I know this. Okay, I hate pouring money into tech. It's so risky. It's so challenging. It takes so much effort. It actually is hard to manage. It's so much easier to put my energy and effort into other things in my business that are problems that I have to solve and challenges that I have to deal with. And then when are we going to have time for to have nice things basically outside of technology? Is technology the only nice thing that we can have? Essentially, we're losing. I think we're losing a lot of the tactile sort of connection with the real world when we look at how tech is affecting people. If you walk down the street and you look at a row of 5 or 6 people that are sitting outside, how many of them are sitting outside looking at at the view or something like that? They're sitting on their phones and they're taking in something there, and they're on their social networks in many cases. I see it all the time. It strikes me, and the technology has taken over, and as it's taken over, it's had this impact, and the impact is going to get bigger. It's going to continue to grow. I think that society is going to have to do a better job of dealing with this. We can't just expect us IT people to just handle it all and just figure it all out. And if we could, then us IT folks would probably be would probably be rock stars. But we do what we can, and the stuff the stuff that we have to deal with is really challenging, folks. So I definitely, encourage you to do what you can for your IT people, to help them, empower them, help them to assist with providing the resources that they need to not let you be the low-hanging fruit. Motivate them to keep you from being the low-hanging fruit. I got out of the world of billing by the hour years ago because I considered it to be practically a conflict of interest, and I think that today is still just as applicable, because if you're paying your IT support strictly by the hour, and you're not doing proactive maintenance to keep your systems from being breached, then it's only in that consultant. It only benefits the consultants. It's like a gift that keeps on giving when you do get an outbreak, other than the fact that they look bad if they're trying to protect you. So, I bring that up because managed services is a really important way to help to defend your networks and systems and to reduce the impact. IT people really hate being called out as the fire response team, and to put out forest fires all day and things. We really do prefer to kind of have a plan for the things we have to handle. So, I hope that this has struck a chord with some of you folks, and I hope you learned something, and that this has been insightful and informative. I'm Brandon with Node, and this has been a discussion and talk on cybersecurity for small business. Thanks, and have a great day.